How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 246 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is prompted by a comment that someone made the other day. So we're into the first week of October, and I suppose what's very noticeable is that autumn color is starting to kick in. But somebody said to me the other day, can forget about the garden for the rest of the year now, and we'll look back at it again next spring. And I suppose that comment is what most people do, to be fair, and it's probably true of a lot of gardeners, is that it's all about the summer color, it's all about the spring color, and the autumn and winter, an early part of the new year, can get, I suppose, passed off as not having much to offer. And I suppose there's a couple of things with that. Like, if you look back on the last 2 years and the amount of poor weather and rain that we've had here in Ireland, particularly during those periods that we say we should be in the garden, namely spring and summer. And when you have that amount of, poor weather during that time, then it really limits I suppose, the pleasure that you can get from it if you view it as somewhere that you only sort of get pleasure from for a small few months of the year. It's true to say here anyway that we can't sit out maybe for a lot of the months of the year, and certainly those days of being able to sit out and eat outside, that probably has passed for the year. I'll give you that one. But without a doubt, there is so much potential for, as Des Dial says in the episode we had with him, moments of joy then throughout the autumn and winter. And I covered an episode a couple of years ago. I think it was episode 142, and that was all about plants for autumn color. And it was, I think it was top 10 shrubs and trees for autumn color. And there's so many on that. And, you know, those plants added to a garden, add interest. And then beyond that, just you can start transitioning into flowering plants, which people think there's very, very few of. But in fact, there's not as many, obviously, as you'll get through late spring, summer, and into early autumn, but there is still lots that can flower at this time of the year and do flower at this time of the year. And so, yeah, the overriding point is to not write off the garden at this time of the year, and to be planting and planning for color and interest. And sometimes it can be interest rather than color at this time of the year. So, and it can take many forms. So it could be the flower of a flowering shrub or tree at this time of the year, of which there's only a small few. It could be, bulbs planted now for next spring interest. It could be winter bedding, for example, that's going to give you color. It could be plants that are, I suppose, famed for their autumn color. And it could be things like grasses that hold structure, or it could be late flowering perennials such as rudbeckias, when the flower heads have gone over and you leave them on it, and then they become treats for the likes of goldfinches later on in the winter. And so these periods of interest, or these moments that you're getting from your garden, are definitely possible. And so, as I say, you shouldn't just write it off once we get to this time of the year. So that's the kind of tone of this week's episode. And I suppose I want to look at how you can add these plants to transition from the high color of late summer, early autumn into the sort of lesser color. And I would have covered an episode previously talking about planters and winter planters, and how any type of color this time of the year can really have a big impact, because everything else is starting to go backwards and fade. And so typically you have darker days, less sunshine. So any flower at this time of the year can really stand out, can really pop, because everything else is looking so dreary. So, not don't write it off. So let's look at maybe some of the things that we can do to, I suppose, transition your garden, and to give you these little periods throughout throughout the next 5 or 6 months that are going to get you through to next spring. And yeah, typically speaking, if you're looking to have autumn color, you want to be adding these plants earlier in the time. But now is a good time to talk about them, because they're very noticeable for people at this point in time. And uh, the categories that we're looking at really are flowering shrubs, bulbs. Again, I know I covered it a couple of weeks ago. Winter bedding, and then trees, shrubs that have huge autumn color. One of my favorites that I've mentioned loads of times, and it's getting better every year, is the red oak. And red oak is a huge tree. It's getting bigger every year here, getting into a quite substantial tree now. And initially, for the first couple of years, anyone that's listening for a long time would have heard me talking about the fact that these big red oak leaves, start at the bottom, and then as you go up along, the ones at the top are still green. And what was happening was the leaves at the bottom were going through their stages. They were going from green to orange to red quite quickly, and dropping off before the ones at the top would. So you weren't getting the full impact of the big red glow that comes from something like a red oak. Now, this year, noticeably at the moment, it's much, much better at holding its leaf, because the tree is a little bit more mature. It's getting bigger. The leaves are a lot more red from top to bottom. So it's starting to put on a show. And over the next, God knows how many years, that's going to put on a bigger and better show every year. And it's something to really look forward to. And this week, that has really prompted me to, along with that comment that, close the doors to the garden, because there's nothing left to see here. But the look of the tree and that comment have prompted this episode, I guess. So let's have a look at some of the trees and shrubs. Obviously, they have to fit into your garden. They have to be suitable for the size. Some of the trees that we're going to mention are very, very big, but we'll mention a list here of, I guess, up to 20, maybe 15, 20 plants that are going to be really superb for sort of autumn, winter, and spring, the earlier part of spring up to kind of the end of February. And then we'll be into March next year, and then all of a sudden we're back thinking with hope of the spring and the summer to come. So yeah, really important not to write off these next few months in terms of the garden, because obviously on top of all the work that we can be doing, or background work that we can be doing, there's so many nice things that you can have at this time of the year, but people seem to forget about them, or maybe don't pay them the attention that they deserve. So starting with flowering shrubs, some really good options are skimmias, saracocca. They're beautiful scent off those. And actually, you will find that some of the winter flowering shrubs tend to have nice scents on them as well. Another one is really good is mahonia. So particularly as it matures over time, you can get really big flowers on it. There can be good scent on some of those, and actually they're really, really good for pollinators early in the year. Mahonia is a really, really good one. Camellias, then obviously that's more autumn or winter and into next spring, so you can get really good flower there. Erica carnea, often seen as, so they're the headers, the winter flowering headers, often seen as old-fashioned here. I suppose if you went back a number of years ago, what would have happened is they got overdone. So you would have seen beds that were planted with nothing else, and so they became this massive flower in the wintertime, and then over time they got very woody, and people perceived them to be kind of untidy and not nice. But Erica carnea, planted in smaller groupings, and in spots where it's not the dominant, so you have these little pockets of color from it, but it's not the only show in town when it comes to a bed or whatever. And that was the problem with it years ago, was that people would plant a bed in the winter time and they'd fill it with Erica carneas. They'd look beautiful for those 2 or 3 months while they're in flower. Great benefit to early pollinators as well. But for the rest of the year, then they look fairly shabby, and then over time they got woody, and yeah, they look really bad then when you start cutting them back and things. But planted in little pockets to give a little blast of color here and there throughout the garden, they're really, really good. They're very good in pots also, and again, gives you a kind of winter color. So there's some of the good flowering shrubs at this time of the year. Another one is daphnes. They're again really good. A lot of different color flowers in those, and they're giving you that flower in the wintertime when there's not much else going on. So really, really beneficial. Bulbs, as I mentioned. So some of the earlier, you will remember back to one of the episodes with Esker Hill Farms, some of the daffodils can start flowering in December. So if you choose the varieties, you can get flower from December. Then your snowdrops are kicking in January. Then crocuses, and then into your daffodils the whole way through, tulips later on. So things like bulbs are going to add little pops of color then throughout the year as well. You can also do, as we mentioned before, staging with your pots. So plant in your pots, then have your color, whatever's in flower at that time, at the door or on your patio or somewhere where you can view them or see them easily. And then once that batch of flowers has gone over, flip it out and put in your next batch that are flowering. And that's a really good way of staging and having color, in areas where you can see it. Then winter pansies, cyclamens, violas, you're going to get all of those in flower this time of the year. Ornamental cabbage, which I personally do not like, but it does give great color. So yeah, you get those in the kind of reddy color and pink color, and then a kind of a really white one as well, kind of a creamy white. And yeah, I'm not going to even say they're nice because I just do not like them, but they do give good color at this time of the year. And I know they're hugely popular. Primroses and polyanthus then as well, they'll start flowering from sort of Christmas time onwards. You'll get some that'll be flowering earlier, but all of those can be used to give color at this time of the year. So now you're starting to see, you don't need to forget about the garden. There is always something of interest. Then onto some sort of bigger trees and shrubs, not necessarily flowering, but with really good autumn color. And again, most of these I would have mentioned on that episode 142, and it's a good one to go back on if you want to catch up on those, go into kind of good detail onto each and every one of them. But things like stag's head sumac, one of the really, really, really vibrant, bright, fiery reds at this time of the year is Euonymus atlantis or alatus. Really phenomenal red color. I actually looked at one today. It was in a garden center, and it was a huge one, and it was just an absolute ball of red fiery leaves. Spectacular color. It actually holds the leaves then for a little while as well, so you're going to see that benefit for probably about 6 or 8 weeks. But it's a really, really fiery, standout red, and that's a great plant. Then a tree that I definitely want to add here myself in the next little while, hopefully maybe during this root ball or bare root window coming up, is Acer Grecium. That tree is spectacular in terms of its bark. So it has kind of a crinkly bark, but a really deep red. Now, again, a bit like the red oak, the benefit of that or the beauty of that won't really come to the fore for many years to come. But when it does in 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to see, at this time of the year, you're going to see all the leaf growth going off the tree, and you're going to be left with, a fiery, deep kind of purpley bark with crinkles through. It's a really interesting bark to look at this time of the year. So again, doesn't have to be a flower. It can be something just giving an interest. Along those same lines, thinking of plants, for bark interest, think like Betula jactamonti, phenomenally white, ghostly white color, planted in groups. I have 5 here. in one bed. They're gone big now, and I sort of prune off the lower branches, so you get these tall white, as I say, ghostly looking stems, and they look really, really well. They're a nice tree all year round, but they look really well into winter. And again, it's not a flower; it's just an interest from the stem. Another excellent one for that type of stem interest, but a lot smaller, is things like dogwood. So there's so many ones of those. You would have seen the very basic ones get planted along the motorways in blocks of color, either in yellows or creams, mixed with reds. So you get a block of red followed by a block of cream. And they are, along the motorway, you can see that interest, but then there's better varieties for within your garden, smaller ones with more slender stems, and they look really, really well at this time of the year. So they're worth adding to the garden again in little pockets, little blocks, and they'll add that period of interest or that look in the time of the year when everything else looks a bit drab. Other trees then to look at, I mentioned the red oak, favorite here, definitely my favorite for autumn color. My own one was underwhelming up until this year. I can see it starting to get better, but I know as I say, in time, that's going to be phenomenal. And you can't wait to see it sort of mature over the next number of years. Another tree that's, again, would be seen as a little bit kind of old-fashioned, I guess, but a tree with year-round interest is Sorbus Joseph Rock. Again, you'll have several periods of interest on that. So you'll have the autumn color of the leaves, you'll have berries later on. And so with a tree, you're getting just loads and loads of, as I said, different types of interest, different colors, and different periods of interest. There's other very good sorbus as well, but Joseph Rock is it's a good one. Again, as I say, it could be seen as a little bit old-fashioned, but it's a very, very good tree. One of the most spectacular this time of the year, but one for a big garden for sure, is liquid amber. Huge tree, really fiery red, little bit like the euonymus I was talking about earlier. So really fiery red, and can hold its leaf for quite a while, but does go into a really big tree, so not suitable for all gardens, but another great one. Cornus Cusa, some beautiful ones of that. China Girl is a particularly nice one, and again has various periods of interest. Mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we had John Smith on from the National Stud and Japanese Gardens, and I saw he had a post up this week just showing some of the autumn color from the acers and the Acer palmatums and so on in the Japanese gardens. And there's a whole raft of them, and the vast majority of them have phenomenal autumn colors. So, if they're a green leaf, they're fading back through the colors, through yellow, back through red. And a lot of them have this really, really fiery autumn color that looks spectacular. And yeah, a lot of them are worth checking out. Other cornices that are worth checking out, Cornus mass is a good one. And then you're talking about some of the crab trees, the ornamental crabs, things like the John Downey, Malus John Downey or Malus Evereste. And again, several periods of interest. Katsura is another really, really good sort of large, medium to large tree. And again, with a huge period of interest. Another category of plants that shouldn't be written off at this time of the year is grasses. So obviously grasses give their real benefit through the, in prairie style planting through the summer and into the early autumn when perennials are, to the fore. And the two of them work hand in hand at that time of the year to, I suppose, create these prairie type looks. But at this time of the year and into the colder, frostier mornings later in typically into December and so on, what you can find is beautiful mornings where you've grasses, particularly the likes of miscanthus, that's planted in blocks, and you get the spider's cobwebs running from one to the other, and then the frost over that, and a low-lying sun, and you get this beautiful shimmer with the frost capture on the grass, capturing the the spider webs and so on. And it's a really interesting, beautiful thing at that time of the year. Again, it's not high color, it's not a flower, it's not, something like that. But you're, as I said, Des Dial mentioned it in the time he was on about his new book, Growing Beauty. That's capturing little pockets or little moments during the winter, and they're certainly really good moments. That shimmer of frost in a low-lying sun, and then the spiders' cobwebs, um, all frosted over, and it looks brilliant at that time of the year. So there's loads of ways of sort of having color and interest. Something else that's totally not related to plants, but really does add interest at this time of the year, is feeding of the wild birds. And we spoke again on the podcast several times about this. But there's nothing that'll give you as much joy as watching the the goldfinches fighting the the Niger seed, or the noise of birds when they're fighting with one another looking for food off the feeder. And that's something that you can easily do, if you have a patio door or a particular window that you sit to look out. Set up your feeder there where you can get good visibility of it, and you'll become mesmerized. If you're not already doing it, you'll become mesmerized looking at the birds there. And again, it's not a flower, it's not high color, but it really is something of real interest at this time of the year. So to that person who said, forget about the garden till next year, there's probably no need. There's loads to be doing. There's loads to give you interest. There's loads to look good. And yeah, it's definitely a time of the year that's underrated. But with some of those plants on that list, you'll be able to add something to your garden for throughout the year, and create longer periods of interest, or create moments as Des says, that you can capture throughout the winter. And in other news, as I said on the podcast a couple of times, I've been involved with a football team, and we got all the way to the county final, and we won the final last weekend. So super news, super for the locality here. It's been a phenomenal week. Great for everybody in the parish. From my point of view, I'll be delighted now to have a little bit more time. So like it has taken up a lot of time, and to have a little bit more time to spend on guest interviews and so on over the next couple of weeks, of which I have a good few lined up already. So really looking forward to those, and to ensure that we keep delivering value on a weekly basis here. Huge uptake in listeners over the last sort of 6 weeks. So yeah, it's been really, really good. Huge uplift in listeners. Again, looking at where you're all listening, it's been great hearing from some of you. I mentioned it a few weeks ago that it would be nice to hear from more of you. And again, keep sending those messages in. Anyone wants to contact me, info@mastermygarden.com or mastermygarden on Instagram, any of those places, just send me a message. And yeah, great to hear from you all, and to see the places where people are listening. Lots of places in Ireland, in Europe, UK, and a huge amount of listeners gaining all the time in the US. So yeah, really, really delighted to have you wherever you're listening, wherever you're from, whatever your gardening situation. Really nice to be connecting with you here. So, and that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.